Welcome back to my disembodied voice. Trust. We all need trust to feel safe, form relationships, and it also is the basic bedrock of social compliance which holds the very fabric of our society together. And a breaking of trust is the cause for so many crimes of passion, irrational retaliations, and damages to our core beliefs that can take years for someone to truly learn to love again. Trust is, quite simply, on a personal, sociological, and even spiritual level, a major part of who we are and what makes up our innate personalities. But in counter to that, we have mistrust and being burned by experience. Metaphorically, I mean, not literally being burnt by fire. And this creates so much conflict in real life and therefore conflict in movies. So I thought it'd be a good idea today to discuss how mistrust affects our brains. So for today's video, join me as we look at how deception and mistrust creates great conflict, causes fantastic character depth, and creates some of the most dynamic and tense narratives in movie history. Now, first things first, let me ride the crow's nest and shout spoilers ahoy for any movie we discuss today and get straight to our flow-through chart. And today's topics are emotional versus social, the biology of mistrust, making monsters, the deepest cut. Right then, let's crack on. Now, it's important that we start with what is trust? Well, according to the English dictionary, trust is defined as a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. And the something is the important word here, as we don't just trust people. We trust services, religion, laws, leaders, groups, machines, organisations, and even commercial companies when it comes to our internal belief systems. And that's because trust forms schemas. Now, a mental schema is an enduring positive, which is adaptive, or negative, which is maladaptive, pattern that develops during childhood or adolescence, which then persists and expands throughout our lives. We all experience the world through the lens of our schemas. Typically, you accept these beliefs without question and might not even be aware that they exist. And our belief system is based up as an ideology from a set of principles that helps us interpret our everyday reality. And these can take the forms of religion, political affiliation, philosophy, spirituality, and social preference. Now, Psychology Today listed 18 of the most crucial schemas which showed how we all view the world, and they are emotional deprivation, abandonment/instability, mistrust/abuse, social isolation/alienation, defensiveness/shame, failure, dependence/incompetence, vulnerability to harm and illness, enmeshment/undeveloped self, entitlement/grandiosity, insufficient self-control or self-discipline, subjugation, self-sacrifice, emotional inhibition, approval seeking/recognition seeking, negativity/pessimism, unrelenting standards/hypercriticalness, and finally, punitiveness. Now, our schemas are all individual and shaped by our personal experiences, but we generally accept the rule of our approved religion, our societal laws, even if you don't agree with them, you abide by them, the rules from our parents in our upbringing, and our sexual partners as we ingratiate them into our lives, marry them, have children with them, move in with them, and then sometimes grow old with them. And trust is the cornerstone of all these schemas, as without it, there is no concrete sense of belief, and without a belief in something, you are and have nothing. So we trust the police and doctors. We trust our partner when they go out for a night with their friends. Maybe trust that Jesus will guide us to a better life. And in opposition to that, we have mistrust. Now, politicians are easy targets as they are often caught lying, but a bad experience with the police, a negative dinner at a specific restaurant, or being cheated on by the love of our life leaves big scars in our heads, and that's because our entire belief system is shaken into jeopardy, dissonance, and fragmented shards which no longer quite fit together. So, when we talk about mistrust, we must first divide it into emotional versus social. Emotional mistrust is on an intimate level, and this guides our relationships, whereas social mistrust is where we no longer believe in the institutions which serve us, but despite this micro versus macro level, the results of deceit are still schema altering. Now, whether you voted Labour or Conservative, Republican or Democrat, whether you follow Christianity or Islam, whether you're gay or straight, and whether you preach rehabilitation or punishment, all of those things are deeply personal and ingrained in who you are. Now, whilst sexuality isn't learned through experience, our choice of prospective partners is a choice, and this dictates the kind of person we fancy via attraction and the kind of personality which we like to bond with. And when you're cheated on or have a bad experience, the emotional scars remain, and this will dictate the kind of future partners you seek, either for re-victimization or someone completely different so you can learn to trust again and rebuild. And whether you agree with the laws of your country or not, you know that murder is wrong, stealing will get you a criminal record, and you can't get behind the wheel of a car when drunk. But when it comes to politics, we remain sceptical of the enemy. Now, there have been movies about political deception and lies, JFK, the Ides of March, and All the President's Men, for example. But the world of hyperbole and 24-hour news propaganda and drama about current politics makes things generally exhausting. These days, news organisations like Fox and MSNBC are not just about reporting news, but about nudging you towards how the opposition party you don't support will ruin your life, take away your rights, and generally ruin your quality of life. Now, let me be clear, I don't care who you voted for. You are entitled to your beliefs, that's your gift to have. But even basic and neutral conversations about politics can become extremely charged inside minutes, and that's because politicians spend months promising change and telling you how they will improve your livelihood on the campaign trail. Then, once in power, for many people, nothing really seems to change, or you see the real bait and switch of their dramatic proclamations. And that's because we remember negativity more than positivity, and it's the same on a personal level. Mistrust can lead us to be single, withdrawn, and angry for years, and put us off dating or trusting someone again. Our safety and core identity becomes fractured, and we retreat into a world of rebuilding where the prism through which we view things changes dramatically. This mistrust and hurt flips our emotions, and positivity becomes pessimism, openness to experience becomes isolation and withdrawn, and a near serrated prejudice and the seeking of rewards devolves into staying in a neutral place of safety where no one can hurt us ever again. So be it on the macro level of politics, or religion, or even a takeaway food giant which one day gave you food poisoning, or the micro level of a partner sleeping with your brother or sister, or maybe being dumped a week before your wedding, a complex reaction of chemical changes and psychological imprints literally rewires parts of your brain, and your once unbreakable view of a set world is now unstable, fractured, filled with dissonance, and tainted. And whilst your political party lying about lowering your taxes may not affect your personality as much as a loved one screwing around with your best friend might, mistrust causes changes inside our brains, which we will now detail in The Biology of Mistrust. Mistrust has deep effects on the brain, influencing how we process information, regulate emotions, and make decisions. Mistrust fundamentally affects our core, conditional, and instrumental beliefs and can change someone's personality. Now, we are all just squishy brains, hormones, chemicals, atoms, flesh, bone, and electrical synapses all working in truly remarkable ways. And when we love someone, we exude hormones like oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, and different parts of our brain function depending on excitement, the amount of sex we're having, time spent in great company, and an overall general positivity. But when we are hurt and we feel broken by deception and lies, several changes occur in different parts of the brain. So let's look at each of these parts and see what they do and how they're affected. The amygdala. Threat detection. The amygdala is the brain's alarm system. When trust is broken, the amygdala becomes more active, scanning for potential threats or deceit. This heightened vigilance keeps you on edge, making you more likely to misinterpret neutral cues. In other words, mistrust keeps the brain in a semi-defensive state, increasing anxiety and stress. The prefrontal cortex. Rational control. The prefrontal cortex helps us assess risk, plan, and regulate emotions. When mistrust dominates, the amygdala can override rational thought, making it harder to evaluate others objectively. And from this, chronic mistrust may also weaken prefrontal cortex amygdala communication, making you more reactive and less reflective over time, which means you become less able to calm yourself or see situations from others' perspectives. The striatum and dopamine pathways. The reward system. Mistrust suppresses these pathways so interactions feel less rewarding or even risky. Over time, this can lead to social withdrawal, loneliness, and reduced motivation for connection. In other words, the brain learns that relationships are unsafe, reinforcing isolation. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Stress hormones. Mistrust triggers the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, releasing cortisol, the stress hormone. Chronic cortisol elevation can harm the hippocampus, the memory center, and impair emotion regulation and contributes to anxiety, sleep problems, and even physical health issues. We must remember that the body and brain stay in a stress loop even when there is no immediate threat, and this symbiosis leads to long-term and short-term negative problems where we are constantly being bombarded by stress hormones and elevated blood pressure. The temporoparietal junction and medial prefrontal cortex. These are the empathy and social cognition networks, and mistrust dampens these regions' activity, reducing empathy and perspective taking, meaning it becomes harder to interpret others' motives accurately, which then perpetuates mistrust. Basically, this will lead you into a cycle where a new negative and maladaptive schema is created, and it will create long-term problems for your approach and phenomenal field of reality. The dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, executive control. This part of the brain plays a crucial role in social cognitive functions, including perspective taking. Perspective taking has been linked to self-control in some studies, and this area of the brain is linked to taking action. We all have a perspective on something. That perspective is a viewpoint, and it engenders strong emotions, or sometimes a mixed response, which often can be misinterpreted by others. Basically, your perspective on something leads you to have your belief, ideology, and take action. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, confrontation. This activates selectively when we are highly sensitive to our opponent's actions, intent, and helps us task switch, which prevents interference, lowers emotional control, and also working memory. Basically, we need to switch off our emotions at times. Emotive thinking is the most primal and basic parts of our brain and can lead us to do the most stupid things. Therefore, if any region of the brain is impacted and we can't turn off that emotional response, we can get stuck in a very hyperactive loop of anger and mistrust and rage. Now, the brain has great neuroplasticity, so we can relearn and rebuild trust, but this takes time and a lot of reprogramming. And this is because mistrust severely impacts our brains and other parts of our physiology, so we always think we're in danger, we become paranoid about being humiliated, and we always feel that we're stuck on alert. This causes our prefrontal cortex to lose its regulatory power, and, as well, our hippocampus, the memory centre of the brain, shrinks and distorts memories. So what we actually remember isn't exactly what happened, and it becomes distorted by cognitive bias, imagination, confusion, and a general reduction of functioning in the memory centre. In short, the brain's ability to separate past from present is impaired, so a safe moment can feel just like a past betrayal. Now, this can be a good thing if your job is dangerous. James Bond, for example, is always in danger, and his lack of trust and emotional scars, best explored in Casino Royale via his blunt instrument thinking and betrayal by Vesper, all of his thinking and prejudice and ideology and worldview and schema is there to keep him alive from day to day as he goes up against highly dangerous assassins and agents. A reduction in threat response and a trust in loved ones would make him weak, so he needs to live his life with people being disposable and always assuming the worst of everyone. The same could be said for John Carpenter's assault on Precinct 13, when police have to place trust with the criminals that they have locked up in their cells, or they will all be killed by the gang who are seeking justice for a truly heinous crime outside and are now attacking the precinct. But chronic mistrust can do much worse than make you a super spy or a reticent cop. It can also be linked in psychology to making monsters. The brain learns people equals threat, making trust neurologically unsafe and turning them into something violent, angry, and unable to connect with people ever again. Living under persecution, suffering from abuse, and surviving trauma rewires the brain, and whilst not in all cases, and let me be very clear about that, Some movie monsters have been the product of severe mistrust. In other words, those that should have loved them have hurt them, and that hurt has been repeated: mental, physical, sometimes even sexual abuse. And because of that complete breaking of mistrust, where there should be unconditional love, there are completely bizarre changes in the mental state and the schemata. In Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill has been abused horrendously for years and ridiculed by many, and now can only form relationships with his pet moths. People don't represent people anymore. They don't represent someone safe or someone to love. They simply represent meat for his skin, or outsiders that he has no connection to due to being mentally warped for so long by those that should have loved him. The same can be said for Dollarhide in Red Dragon. Chronic abuse from his guardian causes him to become a loner, and even when he does finally have sex, the fusion of pain and pleasure is a paradox and he mentally implodes. And an even more accurate representation of this is in the more family-friendly movie Toy Story 3, where Lotso Huggin' Bear has his heart broken after his perceived abandonment, and he now runs a continuous reign of terror where losing control of everything is his greatest fear. Therefore, when Woody, Buzz and the other new toys come into the centre, they are brutalised into line because there is no trust under his authoritarian regime. And that's because any change in the situation environment affects his schema, and it would cause him to feel threatened again. And he's such a thin-skinned despot that sees everyone as a threat. He must ruin and attack everyone first based upon his mistrust, so he preserves the status quo. Now, let me be clear. Abuse and the breaking of trust by a loved one doesn't make you a psychopath. Not at all. But it does affect how your interpersonal conduct interacts with others. In Reservoir Dogs, the dogs know there is a rat in the gang, but they don't know who it is. This creates paranoia and mistrust as the perfect heist goes wrong, and some of the dogs are either now dead or dying from a gunshot wound. These guys are mostly stone-cold sociopaths anyway, but even their brains are a soup of confusion, and this only accelerates the threats, gun pointing and angry outbursts as they try to work out which one is the rat, which one is the liar, which one has betrayed them. And that's the big problem, because once mistrust is sown, we get the deepest cut. When trust breaks down, everyone becomes tarnished with the same brush, which means paranoia and violence can blossom whilst allegiances and friendships collapse at a truly rapid speed. And there is no better example of this than in John Carpenter's The Thing, where a group of friends and colleagues at a remote outpost find themselves being infiltrated and taken over by a thing which can mimic, imitate and consume something via digesting all the cells and taking over the person. The gang are all rugged men and there are no ladies in the compound, so we have a culture here of manly camaraderie and masculine banter. But once they discover the stray dog and that the thing is amongst them, their little society breaks down very quickly. Soon they are tying each other up, threatening to kill one another, suffering extreme paranoia and not knowing who is who, what is right and wrong and what is up from down. Now, there are very good reasons for this. The thing is an alien and wants to consume them all. But Kurt Russell's MacReady knows that some of them are the thing, but not all of them are the thing. But due to the thing copying and replicating people, trust won't cut it here, so everyone must be seen as the enemy until proven innocent by a biological test. Gone is the trust from working and living together for 6 months in the dark, and we now have fear and threats in absolutes. Their brains have become hyper-vigilant. The centre they work in is falling apart and being vandalised. People are also being tied up and screaming that they are human and to let them go. The whole scenario is one big mess, and the only way to check is to burn blood samples, as the thing reacts to pain as a whole despite each of its cells being separate. This biological test is the only way to prove authenticity. Mistrust rips people apart, and when dealing with life or death in the cold, there is no room for error here. That's why, despite knowing these guys for years and working day in and day out in the pervasive cold of the ice plains, once we see what's at stake and the dogs are eaten and we see the thing crawling across the floor via a severed head, there is no mercy for anyone anymore, and everyone is lying unless clinically proven via the burning blood test to be real. And the thing deals with mistrust wonderfully. It literally has a physiological and clinical procedure to establish the notion of trust. The thing is a masterpiece in deception, twists, turns, and one of the greatest horror films ever made. If you haven't seen it, and you're not opposed to some severe gore, please do check it out. Trust forms who we are. It's the reason for metaphorical scars in our hearts and real deep psychological scars in our brains, and the reason we are cautious or can turn to drink and drugs to blot out distorted and shrunken memories when affected by mistrust, when our trust is broken. Mistrust and paranoia shape us through negativity, and for many people, being hurt by loved ones has changed the very essence of their persona and affects them for the rest of their lives. Anyway, that's it for this week's video. So remember that psychology is cool. Please like, share and subscribe, as more subs means more vids, or even leave a comment or start a discussion, as healthy debate is always welcome on here. And as ever, until next time, I'll catch you later.
Something changed that day inside Lotso. Something snapped.